Hello, my name's Nina Squire. Welcome to my studio. I thought I'd create this little video just to help you with one of my top questions. I often get asked, what do I do with my new pastels? So I thought ahead of the 5-day challenge, it was a great opportunity to show you what to do with this beautiful colour set that I've got from Unison Colour Soft Pastels. So here we have a colour chart. My top tip would be when you get your new pastels, create a colour chart. It gives you a chance to feel all of the pastels, the way in which they go on the paper, the fact that you need a little bit more pressure to get that lovely saturation of colour, and it also helps you to get to know the colours, so labelling them too. So here's our lovely pastels. They come in a beautiful box. A lot of people talk about storage of pastels. I just keep them in this fabulous box that Unison have sent me. As much as it's going to break your heart to do this, I would suggest that you take your pastel and you just very carefully break it in two. So it's just a sort of a firm but gentle pressure, and it'll break hopefully in the middle. So let me just pull that out there. So you get two little chunks. I put the label part back in the box because then I know what colour it is, and I keep this out as my working pastel. So as you can see, there are already some beautiful sharp marks that I can create with this lovely broken pastel. So if I'm using my pastel on its side, I can get some fabulous fine lines. Now, people always ask about creating fine lines with soft pastels. That's how. Just use that lovely broken edge. If I'm trying to apply a sort of large area of colour, that flat side is how I get a beautiful large area covered with pastels. So you can get sort of a heavy covering. This is a sort of cartridge paper, so it's got a lovely tooth to it. Or you can create a glaze, and we'll be using that soft approach to pastels during our artwork to get a sort of a misting of colour, a glaze of colour on some of the rocks. So it's good to experiment with that. So traditional papers are beautiful, and some people love working on them. I'll just give you a little demonstration. You can see that the pastels go on, and there's a little bit of a texture, and that means that you've got some tooth for the pastel to hang on to, and you'll find that you can use your finger to blend the pastels and get rid of those little marks, and you get a lovely blend. Now, if I'm using a slightly more textured surface like Fisher 400 and I use the same pastels, you might be able to see that the colours look slightly more saturated. And I find that because of the tooth of a specialist paper like Fisher 400, which I recommend for working with liquid and soft pastels, the tooth gives the pastel additional kind of surface to hang on to, and you get this lovely saturation of colour. Now, when you add liquid to a surface like a traditional paper, you find that the paper will cockle. That's a art word for it will go a little bit wobbly when it dries. That's okay, because you can flatten it by putting something heavy on top of it afterwards. But Fisher 400 is a slightly more robust surface, so when it dries it will stay flatter. But a good quality paper like this is slightly heavier when you feel it, and that's why it stays flatter when it dries. I use alcohol when I'm liquefying my pastels because it evaporates slightly more quickly. You can use water, but some pastels do behave better with with water rather than alcohol. So here's what happens if I add a little bit of alcohol to the surface of this paper. You can see the pastels sort of a little bit translucent, and I'm able to mix them, but I'm almost losing a little bit of the colour. Let's see what happens if I add some liquid to Fisher 400. So I'll start off with the lighter pastel, and then I get a sort of a more painty surface. And then if I move down into the orange, you can see I get a lovely blend. So I can add a kind of a painty mark. I can flink the pastel and get some lovely splatters. I can work back on to the pastel surface by maybe scraping some pastel on with a sharp blade. And all of this will dry onto the surface of the paper because the binder that sets the original pastel will reset these little sparkles of colour that you get onto the surface of the paper. Next door to this Fisher 400 paper is Pastelmat. Pastelmat is a fantastic surface and I love working with it with dry pastels. If we use our similar colours, you can see that that lovely subtle texture allows a beautiful saturation of colour to be built up, and then blending this lovely colour on top, we can see it looks beautifully saturated. I should say that you can work on Fisher 400 when it's wet because it's a lovely robust surface. You can't always do that with more delicate surfaces, and in fact I find that Pastelmat likes to be a little bit dry before you work on top of it. Some people use inks, some people use watercolour, some people use pastels. It's very much personal choice. I'm exploring today the ones that I love, but there's always different ways of using things, so it's so important to have a go. This is Sennelier Carte paper. It is a fabulous paper, but, and I'm just going to show you how depressing this is, if you add liquid to this surface, what happens is you'll find that the surface dissolves, and then you can actually find that the surface of the paper comes off when you work on top of it, and you'll find that you can't then get pastels to stick to it. You can rescue this, but not terribly well, by just using a Stanley blade to scratch over the surface. But my top tip would be not to use liquid with Sennelier Carte paper. If you've got the traditional paper, once it's dry, I would suggest that you work back over the top with your colours and use a finger to blend. If you're using Fisher 400, do not use your fingers, it will hurt. If you're using Pastelmat, you can use a little bit of liquid, not too much, and you can also use your finger. With Sennelier, if you're using that and that's all of the only option you've got, just use it as a dry surface. So it's fantastic for building up layers of colour, and I love it because it gives a wonderful saturated colour from the pastels. Hope those tips help. Looking forward to seeing your artwork over the next few days. Good luck!